Next, we need to look at randomizing the rotation of these leaves. We also want to keep them aligned to the camera that we're looking through. To do this, we're going to use a couple of nodes available to us in the Turbulence modifiers, or in the modifiers I should say. If you actually look under the Turbulence compound, there is a Turbulence compound called Turbulence Rotation by Cone that outputs a orientation. So if I plug the orientation output of the Turbulence Rotation by Cone into the input of the Emit in Place compound, I get the particles kind of randomly shifting, which is good, but I need a little bit more. So what I want to do in the Turbulence Rotation by Cone, and the only, if you actually don't see this compound, this is included in the compounds that ship with the training material. It's essentially just a variation on Turbulence value by cone, or Turbulence around range. If you look at a lot of these compounds, you can actually make many different variations on them. So if you compare what's in here to some of the presets that come with ICE, you can see the manipulations I've made. So I'm just going to specify some different twist values and different start and end angles. So let's go between 0 and say 720 degrees, so a full 2 revolutions. And let's actually twist our leaves a little bit, again between say 0 and 720 degrees. So we just get some complete random orientation of our particles. Again, the cone axis being turbulized around is the y-axis of the particle. We can specify any axis we want to control our particle orientation. So this isn't looking too bad. If I draw a render region right now, let me actually just hit play. So I'm actually getting drops amassing on the end. And if I do a quick render region, you'll see how everything looks. The leaves, of course, could use some texture, but overall things aren't looking too bad at all. I could probably even increase the number of leaves to sort of fill in the effect. But I'm getting a very nice little drop of water on the end. One of the other things we could do is use some of the align to camera or alignment tools. If we look up under Align filter, there's a series of orientation compounds, and one of them is the align particles to camera. Excuse me. I'm going to pull this into the graph, and I'm going to use the output in port 2, and we can see that nothing really happens here because we need to provide a camera name. We can pick a camera name, but of course, ICE being very visual, we probably want to just drag a reference to that camera into the graph. So if I actually find the camera object, I'll pull it in as a get data node, and I'll use its name to drive the camera name. Now, initially the align particle compound doesn't really look like it does the trick, but if we use an incremental alignment, which is essentially taking into account our randomization, we get a much better distribution of leaf. And of course, that's not stopping us from going back in the Turbulence Rotation by Cone compound and adjusting it some more as well. So you get some nice variations of leaf pattern. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to focus on here is the rendering of this effect. I'm going to set up all of my render options. So I'm going to let this effect play for a few hundred frames just to get the sense of what's going on. If we just play back through our timeline, I really want to get at least 4 or 5 drops. So we'll actually use the initial state to have the particles already in a drip sort of formation, and we'll let the particles run for, say, 200 frames after that. So let me find the first instance where the particles have kind of come down and have made an interesting shape. Say something like that. and I'll set that as my initial state. So I'll just do a save as, final version, select the point cloud, move into the simulate tree, and set an initial state. So that becomes frame 1 of my effect. And now I'll go in and set up the rest. So if I move over to the render toolbar, or the render toolset, in my scene options, I'll set the scene to render over 300 frames at a custom format, 720 by 540. We don't want to change the scene frame rate, no. We just want to change the pixel ratio. So I'll change that to 100%. In my pass options, I'll of course set the default pass name to drip. Now, of course, you would likely want to composite this and isolate the particles for maximum effect for doing blurring, motion blur, etc. But in our case, we're mostly interested in sort of the culmination and the final look. We can always split off at a later date if we need to. So I'll do a final render here, and of course I'll come back in with the final flipbook. So I hope you've enjoyed what we've seen so far with the blobs and rigid bodies in ice. So I'll do a render current pass and come back in a little bit.